going to get ready to get started. And the first thing that if you can get on, right on the chat box, I'm curious as to know whether or not if folks in the class, if you are interested in having a program at a school, or if you're interested in having a program at a community garden, or if you're thinking backyard chickens, or neighborhood chickens, or what your thoughts were, or if you're just still exploring. Does anybody have any comments on what you're planning to do? Let's see. Backyard chickens, okay. Still exploring, all right. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people have them in Los Angeles. Oh, rooftop chickens, that would be interesting. You wouldn't have to worry so much about foxes. Okay. So my background so far has been working with a school program where they're part of the environmental education and science and so on, and particularly with the first graders because they hatch eggs every spring. And so they learn about chickens, and also with backyard chickens. I would be very interested in starting a program where we would have them in community gardens, as they do in other cities like New York City and other places like that. So let's see, raising black soldier fly larvae. I have seen setups, and that's an interesting one, seen setups for encouraging the black soldier flies to multiply more rapidly, and all you have to feed them with is compost. So that's very good. So with this information, let's jump into our, let's see, our PowerPoint. Here we go. And so first I'll let you look at, this is a webcam here that doesn't have any chickens in it now. I guess they've gone in for the evening, but just of a hen house and then the nesting box, and so that we can have some chicken activity, because chickens usually put themselves to bed. You know, going to bed with the chickens is really true. They really go to bed early, and they will put themselves to bed in their coop, which can come up in questions later. So let's jump into our PowerPoint. Okay, so can you see my screen now? Chickens in the City? Right on if you can.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
You'll see the live streaming chickens.
All right. Okay. Okay. All right. So now we should be on the PowerPoint. Thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So first of all, we'll be starting with what some things are called, what's a rooster, what's a hen, covering the health of the chickens, covering what kind of structures and materials will be useful, whether or not you'd want to collaborate with a local school. In DC, we don't have a community garden per se set up, but there are some DC farms that have chickens. And then what you need for program management and where you can get some of your supplies. Okay. All right, so for school programs, that's the first one, is to get in touch with an OSCE certification. and also to kind of plan and see what you're going to need to do. At the end of this PowerPoint, I have an application to fill out for DC. The process is a little different if you're in Maryland or Virginia. In DC, you can only, unless the law has changed, you can only have chickens for as pets and for eggs, not yet for meat. But every state has its own view on this and regulations. And they are rather strict, though, about having them inspected by a vet. Okay, so, and one of the questions, of course, is why keep chickens? There are some trouble. It's not necessarily all that cheap if you feed them with purchased food, but they're very useful for schools. They're very useful for communities, for people to learn about their food source. And as city dwellers, we could help save some heritage breeds that are dying out, which do have longer lifespans than the ones that are being raised just for commercial operations. And of course, they do provide fertilizer. And then here's an example of how chickens can be used. You can use chickens to kind of clear an area, get rid of the bugs, and fertilize it, be your little tillers without doing anything about the soil structure that's adverse. And then grow crops in another yard and then switch them so that you have your newly tilled yard for to plant in. And it can actually be very effective and very useful. The one thing to remember is that you can't allow your chickens to go wandering through the zinnias without them also rummaging through those. So they can be destructive if you're not planning carefully. So here's what we're talking about. This is a tractor coop. If you have enough space, these are very useful because you move them from site to site and there's less cleaning involved, and they go through each area and dig up all the grass, and then you move them from place to place. This is at the old K Street farm. In DC right now, you cannot, the hens are the females, the adult females, and roosters are not allowed in DC yet. There are some areas where roosters are not allowed, but most cities do not allow them. Okay, and on to our next one. So there's a hen. If you're going to be in the city, you'll want to make sure, you want to do this for the health of the chickens, but particularly for having your neighbors happy about having the chickens in your backyard or at your community garden, is that you want to keep it clean. It keeps them healthier. And you want to collect the eggs often for two reasons. One, so that you can bring them in and refrigerate them if you're in a program where you want to make sure that you're following the CDC guidelines. But also you don't want to leave the eggs there because you don't want the chickens to discover that eggs are edible. And you want to keep wild birds, even the cute little sparrows, you want to keep them out of your chicken food and out of your chicken pen because they can carry bird diseases, which are the ones most dangerous for you. Okay. And as far as maintaining them, you want to look at them every day, observe their behaviors, get to know them. If you see a chicken that's kind of off to the side and she's not eating, then that's an indication that she needs to be checked into. They can deal very well with cold weather, but heat is hard for them. So if you're having rooftop chickens, you'd want to make sure that you had ample shade to keep them from being too hot. They can suffer in heat, and it can actually kill them if it's too extreme. As far as disease control, one of the big concerns about chickens are salmonella. Chickens can be tested, so instead of guessing, don't guess, just test. You can collect fecal samples and have them run to see if they are carrying any pathogens that can be communicated to people. Otherwise, just wash your hands after you handle them, and there's not really much of a problem at all. They need fresh, clean water. and they need to have something to do. They're busy all the time, so you can hang a head of cabbage or whatever to keep them occupied. And taking care of chickens' health is more difficult in many ways because there aren't a lot of vets like there are for cats and dogs. And the vaccinations are usually sold in quantities of thousands. So you have to buy something sometimes off-label. I listed Valley Vet is a place online that you can buy medications. And if you're using something like Corid, I'll show a sample of that in a minute, you may have to actually get it in a quantity that would be for treating a calf and then just dilute it appropriately for chickens. And then put together a medicine kit. You want to be able to have things on hand and ready to use as you're caring for your chickens yourself. These are a list. Unfortunately, we don't have a Department of Agriculture and Animal Health in DC yet. We do have urban agriculture as far as growing foods, but not yet on the animals. So if you have a chicken die, it's a good idea to go and have a necropsy, which is where they examine the chicken to see what caused it to die. And then that will help you in taking care of the rest of your chickens. But you have to go out to Frederick. You have to take it to Maryland. We don't have that in DC yet. But there are a couple of doctors, as you can see, one in Gaithersburg, one in DC, and then Dr. McKillop, who works in Montgomery County and Frederick and so on. And then here are some guidelines on what to feed them. Oddly enough, they shouldn't eat uncooked beans, and they shouldn't eat avocados. So there are a few things, onions and citrus are not usually liked by them, but almost any other food. Of course, you'll buy chicken food, but you can give them kale, bananas, you can give them scraps from the kitchen. They love the soldier fly larvae. They love beetle larvae and insects. They do need to have grit, and I recommend making sure that all food is kept off the ground because there are pathogens, worms, and things like that that are communicated the fecal oral route. So if they pick something up off the ground where there have been feces, they can pick them up. So if you have them in a basket or a container, you can avoid that. So here's the coop. I don't know if any of you are handy. Does anyone plan to build a coop? Let's see. Yeah, it is a xylophone, and they will peck at things for services. Let's see. They often do like slugs. Gardeners are very happy to have them eat slugs. I just don't feed them worms. Earthworms, that is. Composting worms don't seem to be a problem because they can carry gapeworm, which is a parasite of chickens. But if they find them on their own, you're not going to be able to keep them from eating whatever they go out and eat. At least it won't be a high percentage of their diet. We use that mainly in a school setting because the kids find it so easy to dig up earthworms and they want to feed them. And if they're feeding them 100 earthworms a day, the chances of them picking up a parasite are higher. The service is not free. There is a fee for it. They used to charge a lot for people from DC, but the last time we went, it wasn't so bad. But they do charge for that. It was like $25. And the reason the earthworms are bad are because as I mentioned, they can carry the eggs for the gapeworm, which is a parasite of chickens. And I think building your own coop is a really good way to get one that is big enough. Many of the ready-made coops are too small and inadequate for that work. One of the things that's interesting is that I always had thought before getting into this that they would want a little tiny perch, something round like a closet pole, but actually 2x4s are better, with the 4-inch side being up so that chickens can rest on it. Unlike perching birds, their feet don't relax in a curved state. So Oh, you custom built your own coop in the past? Good. Well, I hope that we can stay in touch with each other and share pictures of coops and coops idea. I hope that this class will just be the beginning of carrying on. All right, so with chickens, you want to make sure, of course, it depends if you have bantams or full-size chickens, but a minimum of 2 to 3 square feet per chicken and 8 to 10 square feet per chicken in the run, which if you let them do some free ranging helps with that too. It's good if there's room in there so that you can get in to clean, show off your chickens, and so you can easily clean and all that kind of stuff. Do not use chicken wire despite the name. You got to use hardware cloth because raccoons and everything, dogs, everything can get through chicken wire, so it doesn't keep them secure, and chickens can be preyed on easily. It needs to be easy to clean, well ventilated, and you want to have some storage so you can keep your food next to where you're keeping your chickens. Okay, and the way that you keep a chicken from leaving the coop is you put a fence, a run around it, and it's also helpful to have some kind of, at the very least, wire over the run to keep out wild birds because they can carry bird diseases, and also to keep out hawks because they will prey on the chickens. And you don't want to use cedar. Chickens have very sensitive respiratory systems, and you can use wood shavings, and you can use pine pellets, which are usually used for horse stalls, but they can be used and they're very good and very absorbent. We actually bring our food container in at night because rats are very attracted to the food, and if it's not out there when the rats are active, that helps, and they're not so persistent in trying to get in. You also don't want to provide a water supply for the rats. So if you remove them or have them secure so that they can't get into them is good. Flooring can be just grass or soil. We actually put down cement pavers for ours because it prevents animals from digging in. A metal trash can is an ideal thing for storing food, and it's better if you can put it someplace where it isn't actually raining on the trash can, but it is tight. And be sure to use something like a cord, bungee cord or something to fasten the lid down, because raccoons are famous for being able to open up trash cans. And then just when you're thinking about how to build your coop, you actually need a second coop. And it doesn't have to be nearly as big, but it's called a broody box. And if your hens can go, it's called going broody. It depends on the light cycle and what's going on in the hen's mind, but they will decide that now is the time to sit on eggs and hatch them. Eggs, hens do not need a rooster to lay eggs. Laying eggs is a normal part of their menstrual cycle, but they do need to have roosters for the eggs to be fertilized. So you don't want your hen to remain broody. It's very tiring for them. They will stay on those eggs and only get off once or twice a day to poop and quick drink and eat something, and then go back and keep those eggs warm. So since the hen is sitting on unfertilized eggs, you want to put her into another pen and make sure that she doesn't have any eggs to sit on to break her from being broody. Otherwise she will just sit on them. Instead of just for a month, she'll sit on them for weeks and weeks and weeks. Another reason to have a second coop is if you have other smaller chicks, you want to raise them to full size before you put them in a coop. And whenever you have a chicken who is sick or injured, you can isolate them from the other hens and take care of them. And sometimes you will have a chicken who is too domineering. You've heard of pecking order. It is a normal process of them deciding what order everyone eats, like waiting in line. But sometimes one hen will be very aggressive and will actually be injuring other hens. And those injuries can incite the rest of the flock to keep, pecking at them. So instead of isolating the hen who is the bottom of the pecking order, have found that it's more effective to remove the aggressive hen, look and see who's doing it, isolate her, let the hens sort out, the flock sort out its pecking order, and then reintroduce her. At that point, she will then be the new chicken. She'll be at the bottom of the pecking order, and it kind of sorts things out, and it usually works pretty well. It's also a good way. You shouldn't, from health standpoints, ever introduce new hens to your flock, but home backyard chicken keepers often do. If you do, you want to at least have a second coop so that you can isolate and quarantine any new chickens for a month or so to make sure that they aren't carrying anything before you introduce them to your flock. And also, if the flock and the new hens can see each other, it's a way of gradually introducing them. So here's an example of secure. On our coop, we have a door that opens down. You'll see there's a carabiner that holds the lock in place, so then it's locked on both sides, so there's no crack big enough for anything to slide in. And when you fold it down, you can see the 3 nesting boxes and the eggs that the hens have laid in there. To encourage the hens to lay there as opposed to any dark corner in the coop that they might think looks good, we actually put some ceramic eggs in there that are fake. I would put a little C on them so we don't accidentally collect them. And so that's what they look like. You can have one advantage of keeping your own hens is you can see the egg on the right has a C on it. That's a ceramic egg, and the egg on the left is a crested cream leg bar egg, which is blue. And that's one of the advantages of keeping your own chickens, is that you can have, if you look at the eggs above, on the far left at the bottom, there is a well summer egg, which is a deep, deep chocolatey brown. And then next to that is the cream, crested cream leg bar egg. And then we have one of the Delawares lays that egg. So you'll see you have all these different colors depending on what chickens you choose. Americanas are another breed that also lays a blue egg. Okay, and then that is a lock. You want this, if you just have a lock that can flip up like that, some animals, particularly raccoons, are able to open them. So you need to have something that requires understanding how the lock works, in addition to having dexterity. Yes. And as far as introducing chicks to a flock, which is a question we have, you don't want to bring new chicks into a flock because they will be interlopers and they're too small to defend themselves. So that would be a good reason to raise them up to size before introducing them. The exception to that is that sometimes the mother hen, if she's high enough in the hierarchy, she can make it very clear to everyone she will be protective of her chicks, but you're kind of stressing her. So it's, unless you have a lot of space, it's a good idea to keep the mother hen and the chicks, or the chicks alone, separate from the flock until they are equal in size. Now here are some of the predators. On the left, you can see a rat, which is a very good sized rat that we caught on a night camera, which is why the color is weird. That rat inspected all the locks, every door, every crack, and spent about a half hour trying to nose in at every entrance that it possibly could. And you can see that we have a board stuck in there and all that kind of stuff. So that rat was putting a lot of energy into finding any weak spot in our coop. One of the advantages is that if you bringing the food in at night is the rats, are you really going in for food and water? They will also take eggs, and they can hurt chickens, but they're generally not going in unless they're awfully hungry to try to just take on the chickens. But removing the food so that they don't, highly interested in getting in there helps. The other picture, we have had a lot of problems with foxes. That's, of course, you can't have a window just left open. If you have windows in your coop, which is good, you need to have hardware cloth on the window opening as well. And then the bobcat, we've had foxes and raccoons and rats. And hawks come into our backyard. We have not had bobcats yet, but this one was seen on the canal, so it could happen. Then we do have a lot of squirrels too in the upper left-hand corner. Squirrels, if they can get into the coop, will go into the coop and steal eggs. Raccoons can get into an awful lot of things. They're very good at lifting latches, so that's why you need to have a latch with some kind of locking device on it, or a cord keeping the lid on your trash can. And hawks can get them if they are out in the walking around without protection, with wire above them. Roosters actually work very well to warn the flock if there's something coming in like that, a predator, but we're not allowed to keep roosters in DC. The sparrows at the bottom, they're cute, but they can have lice, they can have Merrick's disease, they can have a lot of different bird diseases and communicate them to your chickens. So it's best to keep wild birds out, just as basic biosecurity. And then we feed our chickens lots of table food rather than throwing anything away. And we also get some things for them that they like to eat. The tops of carrots, for example, which in the top middle, if you chop them up, the chickens enjoy those quite a bit. They like fruit and they don't mind if the blueberries aren't perfect. You don't want to feed them anything moldy because that can make them sick, but anything, if it's just a little bit squinchy, it doesn't matter. And they like the insides of green peppers, and they like banana peels if you chop up the peels small enough for them to be able to eat them. You'll notice that pan is very big. We use very large pans because they fit inside of each other. They nest. You can get them at Tractor Supply or Southern State. And that way a lot of chickens can eat at one time, and it reduces stress in the flock. If you put out something where only a few chickens can get into it, they get very stressed, and the ones lower on the totem pole can't get in any food. Yes. How much do chickens eat? They eat like a good sized handful of pellets a day. I don't know how much that is in pounds. I'll have to get back, ask me a question on email and I'll have to get back to you on that exactly. But they usually eat one time in the morning where they load up and they fill up their crop, and then they go, which is the space in their neck where they hold their food. They don't have teeth, but they do have a gizzard. And one of the reasons they need grit is because they need to have grit in their gizzard to help them grind up their food before it goes into their stomach. And so they will often go perch and sit and digest, rather like the avian equivalent of a cow chewing a cud. And then they will go out in the later in the day and load up again on food. They like to wander around and just look for little bits, chase moths, dig up beetle larvae and so on over the course of the day, but they usually feed heavily 2 or 3 times a day. Now, one of the things that really helps in chicken management is to teach them to come to the sound of your voice. And the easiest way to do that is to just make a habit of calling them every time that you're going to feed them, or anytime you're going to give them treats. Keep some dried mealworms on site and just spread them out there. And then you see we're using a big pan. It's big enough so that all the chickens can feed at one time, which keeps them from getting frantic. Although the one in the center with the gray on top, that's our cream leg bar. And her name is Zinnia, and Zinnia is a little bit bossy, and she will sometimes stand in the middle of the pan to try to keep everybody else from eating. The chicken down at the bottom, that's a Welsummer, and then we have an Americana, and I think the other one is either the Copper Moran or an Americana. And so every time we bring out food, we call chick, chick, chickie, and they come running. That's helpful if they ever get out. We asked about that too. If they get out, or if you need to put them in because you're going to be leaving, having them trained to come for treats. But don't let them down. If you call them, be sure you have some treats for them. They will be a lot easier to manage because you can get them into the coop anytime you want. Now, one thing that they need for cleanliness, odd for us, but for birds, is they need to be able to dust bathe. And if you have them in a coop, you'll want to provide some kind of dust bath for them. It can be a metal tub like this one, or it can be a plastic tub. Just make sure there aren't any sharp edges where they could cut themselves on it. The mixture is used, you can use some garden soil. You can also use sand, which is this bag of sand. And we also put some wood ashes in there. That's a nice dust to help keep down the bugs. So you pour in the sand, pour in some wood ashes, then pour in the rest of the sand and stir it up. And then the finished product is just a combination. You can throw other things in there. They will get in there and squish all around and get the dust all over their skin. And it helps to keep off lice and insects like that from bothering them. Lice and mice. So here you'll see, the first time I saw a chicken dust bathing, here's when she is using a flower pot because somebody's in the dust bath, but she's lying down and it looks kind of scary because her eyes look odd, but she looks like she's in a trance or she's injured, but they just get themselves all wiggled into the dust and then seem to just lie there enjoying the warmth of it. So, I know, so yes, old fireplace wood ash. Thank you for asking. I don't mean the ash from burning the chemical charcoal briquettes. You don't want to use those because they have all kinds of petrochemicals in them, but you can use wood charcoal and you can use plain old wood ash is fine. I take out the big chunks because I don't want the chickens to be marking themselves up with charcoal, but it wouldn't hurt them. And you can see here, they are cramming into the flower pot. They're jammed in there so tight that they can hardly both fit in, but these two Delawares really like each other and they do everything together. There they are trying out the bigger tub and that seems to work out well for them too. All right, and then one of the next questions to think about, I put this list in here. It's the Henderson's Handy Dandy Chicken Chart. It's really its name. There are a lot of different breeds of chickens out there. One of the things that is handy about something like the crested cream leg bar is they are chickens developed in England for backyard chickens. They lay blue eggs, they lay a lot of eggs, but not so many that they have a lot of problems with stuff like prolapsed vents, which chickens who lay a lot of eggs tend to be more prone to, and that can be fatal for the chicken. So if you have a heritage breed, they will lay a lot of eggs over a period of several years, and some of the hybrids that have been raised to produce a lot of eggs just produce their lifetime's worth of eggs in a very short period of time. That works well for production because then they slaughter all the chickens and bring in new ones. But for a backyard, you'd probably be more interested in chickens that have a long life and tend to be very healthy and lay eggs over the course of time so that you always have eggs. They need to have access to a dust bath all the time. I just keep one in the coop and keep one right outside if they have a yard that they can get into every day. They don't necessarily bathe every day, but they need to be able to bathe whenever they feel that they need to clean up. It's also soothing for them. They enjoy them. Leghorns and Rhode Islands are both nice breeds. Leghorns lay a lot of eggs. But you want to get some that aren't the production type, and they also tend to be a little harder to handle. They're the Mediterranean type that are lightweight and tend to be extremely active. Rhode Island Reds are very good layers. They can often have kind of an aggressive disposition with other chickens, so you wouldn't want to have Rhode Island Reds and like salmon falverals, which are very laid back, definitely type B chickens, and put them together because they'll beat up the falverals all the time. I agree with you that a lot of the hatcheries do not treat chickens humanely. and some of them macerate the males. It's a tough business. There are a lot of places like Deer Run Farm, which we'll mention at the end, that is a national poultry, it's an NPIP farm, which means it's the National Poultry Improvement Program. So they test their chickens for diseases, and they raise them on grass in tractor coops, so they're protected from predators, but they have a normal chicken life. Okay, so here are some breeds that we can talk about. Americanas are often the ones that are sold as Americanas aren't really Americanas, but they're often just crosses. But if a true Americana or even an Easter egg will usually lay a colored egg. Olive eggers are a cross between a cream leg bar and another hen, or a Americana and another hen. So that, or another rooster rather, so that you get the combined genes of a blue egg and a brown egg, which gives you an olive colored egg. Golden comets are an example of a hybrid that is a cross between two breeds, and they are really heavy duty layers. And then black australorps also lay a lot of eggs. The cream leg bar, that was the one I was mentioning, is auto sexing, so that when they hatch out, you can tell by looking at them whether they are males or females, which makes it easier for the city. For summer heat, it depends on the breed. Some breeds do better with summer heat, so that's a good thing to check with your breeds. Leghorns do well with summer heat, but a lot of the very large hens with the heavy, stocky bodies do not. Delawares do very well in our climate. They were developed in Delaware to survive in the mid-Atlantic region. There is a danger of and also another thing on summer heat, they should have access to heavy shade, you know, not just a tarp, but some really good shade so they can stay cool. And dust bathing seems to help them cool too. You can overfeed them, but if they are moving around all the time, they'll do fine. They usually won't overeat food, you know, regular standard food, but they will overeat on treats. So you don't want to give them too many treats. Yeah, and I will share about different places where you can get chickens, like Deer Run. There are chickens that are better around 4-year-olds. I think it's better to have some that are very calm. The australorps are calm. The cream leg barks can be a little bit spunky, but they're also very friendly. Golden comets are usually friendly. And the salmon faverolles that I mentioned earlier are very, very friendly chickens and easy to be handled, easy to handle. You need to teach your kids how to hold a chicken or just pet a chicken. But the chickens, one of the nice things about chickens around kids is that I love dogs and I love cats and I like all different kinds of animals, but dogs do sometimes seriously hurt kids. And although you hear stories about someone being chased by a rooster, no one that I know of has ever been mauled by a hen. So they're a very safe animal to have around kids and people. And they're nice pets with benefits because they're friendly and they also lay eggs. No chicken mauling, that's right. So if you are working with kids, and I've done a lot with kids, particularly with social emotional growth, it's really helpful to have an animal, a small animal that's not too scary to take care of. And it's good for all of us, typically developing and atypically developing, to show the way to do a hands-on discovery and how to hold a chicken, maybe sit on a bench next to the chicken and have the adult hold the chicken on the bench too, to get a chance to be able to pet them. You want to have a spacious space area of the run for them. Chickens are calmer if they're not stressed, and if they're crowded, they're going to be stressed. If you teach the chickens to come when they're called and teach kids and neighbors how to call them, it will make them, it will show their personalities and let the personalities shine. And nothing wins over your neighbors faster than sharing eggs with them, particularly if they're snazzy blue and green ones. So you do want to make sure that you collect eggs daily or twice a day. One of our girls tends to lay in the late afternoon. Most of them lay late in the morning. They wake up. We don't give them coffee, but they wake up, they kick around, they get something to eat, and then they go in and lay eggs. But we have one who's an afternoon girl. You want to be able to have waterers, and you want to have more than one, so that all of the chickens have access to it. You don't have like a little hanger back chicken who's not getting adequate water. You also want to make sure that birds aren't getting into them. And sometimes when you give them medications, you put it in their water. So it's good to have water containers that are non-reactive. That is, they will not react to having vinegar, like apple cider vinegar is often used in their water. You don't want to have something that'll react to that. You want something like plastic or ceramic or stainless steel. And then put hanging treats and stuff like kale plants by their stems or in a roller. That is something that keeps the chickens busy and helps them to be calm because they have things that they like to do. Okay. And then when you go away, we actually put a door, an electronic door that has a light sensor on it, so it closes itself at dusk, and it makes a little beep before it starts to close. And it's designed that if there's a chicken in there, it's supposed to bounce back like an elevator door does. That way, if we were out, remember in the days when you used to go out to restaurants and eat outside? Well, in those days, you didn't have to, or if you're working late, you didn't have to be sure to be home by dusk. The chickens would put themselves away in the coop and the door would close, and they were safe from predators because it was on gears and was quite secure. But whatever your system is, if it's a neighbor, if it's you, whoever it is, you need to make sure that they have food and water over weekends, and that they're put in at night and kept clean and protected. So they're a 365, 24/7 kind of responsibility, but it's not really much hard work, but you need to set aside a little bit of time every day for them. And if you have the space, if you're building a coop, if you are building the coop, you could build one that moves around. And a lot of urban settings, you don't have any place to move it to. You've got one spot where you can have it, and that's that. But if you have a big lawn or a big field, you can use a chicken tractor, which is what a lot of the farms do. And then they can move the chickens around, and they always have clean space under them. And that's great. And it can work in with your crop rotation plan too. The trick on sorting the eggs are supposed to store better if you have them pointy end down, and it's particularly important if you are getting hatching eggs, because you want to make sure that the embryo doesn't adhere to the inside of the shell, so that it can develop and crack out of it. Eggshells are good to put in your compost pile, and chickens love to turn your compost pile. If you can give them access to it, they will climb in. Unfortunately, they're not as good as putting things back as they were at kicking them out. So you want to have some kind of side around it so that it will be to your liking when they're done. And we have a question here. You do need, if you have a secure run, you do not have to close the coop door. It's a good, if something gets into the run, then if the chickens are inside the coop, because you're more apt to have predators come in at night. There are more predators that operate at night than all day long. So might be a redundancy, but sometimes you needed that redundancy, but it is not necessary. Our automatic door is actually on the run that's attached to the coop, and that's to let them out into the backyard, which also has a fence around it, but predators can get past the fences. As far as the compost, if you're using the compost, it would let it rest after it's been turned by chickens. People say that a year is plenty. Also, you want to bear in mind that if you keep testing your chickens for things like salmonella and stuff like that, you will have a better idea of what's going on in your chicken's guts. But you don't want to put any fresh manure on edibles. So you can either let it sit or you can use it on your shrubs and so on. People have been coexisting with chickens for a long time without mishap if your chickens aren't sick, but of course you do want to be careful. You do want to make sure that you wash your hands. You don't want to carry anything dirty into your chickens, and you also want to make sure that you wash your hands after handling chickens. The things that chickens can carry, not necessarily do, but can carry usually bacterial that can be washed away easily enough. And you want to make sure that anyone who is working with the chickens, your kids, your neighbors, or whomever, know how to move calmly around the chickens. That's not the place to play tag, and that you have arrangements for when you're away. Okay. And I'm on well water. Any considerations I need to have on where to place the run? I would think that the chicken poop, your well is probably quite deep. I wouldn't put the coop on top of where the well is, and being downhill would be good. You do also want the chicken coop to be located someplace that's high, so you don't want it over a septic field. But depending, that's a question that I think that it's above my pay grade to know exactly how far it would have to be, because it would depend on how your soil percolates and also how deep your well is. And your well should be capped such that the surface water doesn't get into your well anyway, but not relying on that 100%. So I would say that that would be better to not have them positioned right over the well, but exactly how far they would need to be away would be someone who knows more about those water systems than I do. I wash, if I have anything on my hands that might be communicated, like if I've pet other animals or something and I might be carrying something in, I wash before. For farms where they raise chickens, they maintain biosecurity and they pull on little paper booties before they go in. So it depends, but if I've been out gardening, I would probably wash my hands before going in, and then you definitely wash your hands after you've handled the chickens. Okay. All right, so when you draw up your own management plan, if you're running it for a school program, you actually have to have a formal management plan. I don't think it's necessary to have it on that form, but you do need to map out what are my costs, what am I budgeting? I'm going to have to budget a meds kit. I'm going to need to budget the cost of food. I'm going to need to build a coop. I'm going to need to make sure that someone is taking care of the chickens. And sometimes you could keep chickens perhaps with a neighbor so that you can share the duties and share the eggs. But you need to be sure that you have all of this sort of thought through before you just go in and buy yourself some chicks and then discover, oh my gosh, they need to be fed, they need to be cleaned, they need to be watered. And if you decide that you're going to move and you can't take the chickens with you, have some idea of what you're going to do with the chickens, what you can do, and if there's a farm that would be willing to take them, or another neighbor, or some other plan like that, so that you're free. And then for the next steps, think about if you're going to keep them in your backyard, you will need to collect signatures from your neighbors to agree to that. So you might want to consider whether or not you can do it on a DPR farm, or if you can work with a school that would like to have a chicken program, or some others to kind of collaborate and look into these possibilities. Just to take some of the pressure off you. But a lot of people like to work in community, and other people tend to like to work independently. So that is kind of up to you. But it's not a bad idea to have it to start your program under the umbrella of a school program. Okay, so now I want you to meet Fluffy. All right. Okay, so this is Fluffy, and she is part Americana, as you can tell from her little earmuffs. She's a little bit of a mix. She did lay a brown egg. She's now our layer emeritus. She doesn't lay eggs anymore, but she has quite a bit of personality, and she often goes with me on my chicken classes. And so that people have a chance to hold her and see what a chicken looks like. If you are keeping a chicken and looking out for their health, you would want to look underneath their wings, because that's where lice might collect, or by their vent. And then also look at their legs. So if they're used to being handled, it's a lot easier to take care of your chickens. And you can look at them. If their comb is nice and red like this, and full of color and vibrant, and their eyes look vibrant, it's a good indicator that they're healthy. Those are the things that you're going to look for and see if a feather can be a stray, but if their color is good. And you can also look at their feet. Their toes should be well formed, and you look for injuries and things like that. So this is a good way. Also, when you feel the front of the chicken, this is called the keel. When you feel them, there should be a lot of muscle mass attached to it, because that's where their wings are powered. So if they're missing anything there, if they're very light, that means they're probably not eating enough, and you need to find out what's going on with your bed. Okay, so molting is something that chickens, why don't you sit over there, sweetie? Molting is something that chickens will do annually, usually. And they will often do it in the winter, which seems odd to us, but they kind of shed really fast and they molt. There's an easy molt and there's also a hard molt. The hard molt is when they lose everything all at once. And that is hard on them, obviously. I guess that's why it's called a hard molt. You want to give them, make sure they're having a lot of good food that gives them all of the protein and everything else they need to rebuild their feathers. Be careful when you handle them, because the feather shafts, when they're coming in, are actually sensitive. It's kind of like a nail that's cut too short, and they can feel that. So you want to be careful when you're handling them. And whenever you're handling a chicken, you want to pet them in the direction that the feathers grow, but particularly when they're molting, they're going to be very sensitive. And it's peculiar that they often do it in the fall, but they will molt and then they will have a new growth of feathers, and that gets them ready for the cold weather. Also, the hens, when they go broody, they'll often go broody like around odd times of year, but they might do it in the winter time, as though they're getting their chicks ready to come out in the spring. And then the process of being able to have them handled is, a lot of it is just handling them. If you get them when they're young, it's a lot easier, because you can have the brooder, which I'm not going into great detail tonight, but you can get, we can have subsequent classes on how to set up a brooder and how to keep raised chicks. And I'd love to do that if there's interest in it. But if you are calling to them every time you feed them, and you're giving them treats, you move slowly and gently, and try to hold them so that they feel like they're not going to be dropped. And just call, feed, and before you know it, they will be quite tame and quite easy to handle. And let's see, it is not too late to get chickens. There's been a huge run, and a lot of the hatcheries are very low on chickens right now, because we're all concerned about the pandemic and wondering about where we're going to get our food supply. So that being said, you might have to wait a long time before you get some. But those are the big hatcheries that everybody knows about that are completely swamped. There are a lot of local farms that also sell chickens that you can get. You can buy pullets, which are older chicks and they don't require as much care. They're called coop ready. And you can get those. They cost more, but then you don't have to make the brooder and do all of that other stuff. So that has the advantage. One of the ones I mentioned is Deer Run Farm. We'll be putting in a list of other farms as well too. I can't recommend all of the farms necessarily, but there are some hatcheries that advertise as being humane. And unfortunately, though, a lot of them will only sell what they call straight run chicks. And that makes sense if you have lots of space. If you are in DC or any of the other places where you're not allowed to have roosters, getting straight run is difficult, because what straight run means is it's just as they come out of the hen, whatever your odds are, you're bound to get some females and some males. And then in DC, you have to find a home for those males. In the old days, when people kept chickens on the farm, this was not a problem, because you're going to have somebody in the stew pot at some point. So that might as well be the males. These, in the days of us keeping chickens as pets with benefits, it's a different matter. And when we have regulations that we can't even keep the rooster at all. Let's see. And oh yeah, we'd love to have a second class. And I'd like to show you some things too about medicines and things that I use for treating chickens. One of the things that's handy to have around is just plain old Vaseline. It's something that you can spread on their legs if they get some abrasion or something. It protects it. This is something called Blue Coat. It colors the cuts, and one of the bad things, or one of the, you know, they are our avian dinosaurs. When chickens see something that looks like it might be good, like if they see a snake, they are excited about trying to catch that snake, or if they see a little bug, they will go for it. And if they see blood, they will go for it. So if one of the chickens is injured, the other chickens might go for it. Blue Coat, what it does is you apply it to a wound, and it colors it so that it doesn't look like blood anymore. And that helps to protect the chicken. Of course, you can, if a chicken is really injured, you would of course take them and put them in your little broody box. And then here is the apple cider, the organic stuff. And this is something that is often given to chickens, put into the water, is used for medicinal purposes. Yeah. Something special about DC, keep in mind, well, you know, if you have a nice yard, keeping chickens in DC is a great idea. And I would love to see lots more people get in touch with where our food comes from, and to find out that chickens actually have personalities. They can be fun to go around. They can be like Fluffy, where you want to keep them around for years and years. The one thing with DC is when we get down to the end, I didn't have any way to attach it, and there's no website link for it. So I do have a copy of the application that you need to fill out. And so I'm going to have, if everyone who is interested would please email me at the email below, and with the application in the topic line, and I will send it to you. Space and distance requirements are 50 feet, and that's from any domicile. So that kind of eliminates an awful lot of yards in DC, and it would be interesting to see if we can get that a little more wiggle room on that, and if we also could have some kind of veterinary, you know, any land grant college information on keeping poultry in the city. And I am sharing the PowerPoint. We're recording. And the recording and the PowerPoint will be available online for everybody, so you can come back and check it out. And there's some little websites at the end that are too hard to get when you're watching it, but you can look at it later and find it. Here's another little thing that you can have in your medicine kit. This is another spray to put on wounds. It sounds like my chickens are always being wounded, but they're not. But you need to have something on hand. Of course, you'd want to have some gloves to hang on to them. And I wanted to show you, let's see, can you see these? These are eggs that are from our chickens. As you can see, they lay all different colors. There, got those? So they lay all different colors. They really taste good. And it's awfully nice to be able to get them. I got these little egg cartons because it's been very nice, particularly when there was an egg shortage, to be able to share eggs with neighbors. This is one of the fake eggs. They're usually wood or ceramic. I write a C on them so I don't accidentally collect them when I'm out getting eggs. But this is where you put it in place that you want, that you think ought to be a laying box, to let the girls know that this is where you have in mind, because otherwise they could find a little, you know, a plant pot. Here's another medicine, Vet RX. And then this one, this is an English one, and this is for preventing worms and digestive problems. And this is a spray that I use to try to keep them from getting mites and lice. You spray it under their wings and around their vent. If your chicken has a dirty vent, you know something's going on. I will use antibiotics. The thing about antibiotics with livestock is that if an animal is sick and they need an antibiotic like a neosporin or something on a cut, that's one thing. It's a difference between that and then in the cases where you have the animal plants where they're being raised as an industrial crop. They're being fed food that is not appropriate for them, and they're given antibiotics to keep them going so that they don't have the digestive enzymes in order to be able to break it down. So that's a different use of antibiotics. So I would still consider my hen antibiotic free if she got a cut and I put neosporin on it, but that's not quite the same as giving them antibiotics. And if you have a sick chicken and you have to give them medication, then you don't eat the eggs during that time. And I don't know about the regulations of Prince George's County, but there is an organization called Backyard Chickens, and it's a good it's a good organization to check out because they have a lot of listings for many different, like Baltimore. Every place has its own little code, so it's totally different. What you can do in LA, you can't necessarily do in San Francisco, you know. And the same with Washington and Baltimore. Washington is kind of putting its toe into the water right now. So it'd be good to encourage this to go a little bit farther, but having more people interested is going to be key. And also having people keep chickens in a way that doesn't alarm their neighbors is going to be a big help too. There are some email groups, not in DC, but there are email groups, Maryland Chickens, and there's Backyard Chickens in Maryland, Backyard Chickens in Virginia, Backyard Chickens, and also Rare Chickens, and there are some chicken breed clubs. And yeah, the University of Maryland has a good program. The lab that I was telling you about in Frederick is part of the whole Maryland state system, and they have terrific information on it. I have talked to some of the, gotten information from the University of Maryland. However, bear in mind that the main thrust of the program there is raising chickens for production. So the policy is that or the practice is that you're going to completely clean the premises. You bring in chickens that are all the same age, you put them in, and if they're meat chickens, the meat chickens have to be harvested at the same time because they grow so fast that they're soon not able to really stand up, and they will probably have a heart attack if you don't slaughter them. So you go through and you process them that way. With layers, they bring them all in, they have them lay their eggs, and then after they've gone through their peak laying period, then they are harvested, and then the building is cleaned out and they bring in another stack. And usually farmers specialize in either hatching eggs or raising chicks, or, for each life stage, the chickens are usually moved from one site to another. It's a little different when you're doing it yourself. You can have them all of one age. That's the best way to prevent any kind of disease transmission. But I find a lot of backyarders like chickens, and they will tend to adopt chickens and bring in more. They decide they've just got to have a blue layer, or they want to try something new. If you are introducing chickens, do be careful about keeping them isolated, keeping them quarantined. And it's a lot easier to introduce 2 or 3 chickens to a flock than it is to bring one chicken in who's does not belong to the flock, because they will immediately have everyone making sure that they make sure this chicken realizes that I'm above you. And so it's a lot easier if you bring them in pairs. And let's see, what else have we got? Okay. A small electric fan in the coop would be a good idea. You want them to be able to have ventilation, even in the winter, you want to have ventilation. You don't want to have a draft blowing on them, so you wouldn't want the fan then, but you do want to have air moving through from like below, like at the bottom of the coop, and then up above them with some kind of vent above, so that any fumes from their waste is not building up inside of the coop. You do want them to be safe from the weather, but you don't want them to be breathing in ammonia in their air. And in the summertime, they really need a lot of ventilation. And a lot of times I find that our chickens will sleep. We have roosts outside and in the run, and we have roosts inside in the coop. And if it's warm, a nice balmy day, they will all be on the roosts outside. And sometimes it'll be pretty breezy, but they prefer to be outside. You got to remember, they're wearing a down coat. So they're pretty good. They're pretty good as far as the cold goes. And one advantage of using the 2x4s for a perch is that if it is cold, they can push their feathers down and their body over their feet and protect their feet from the cold, which is important for them. And perching birds have a different foot structure. When a perching bird is relaxed, their foot is curved like this, and of course that's so they can perch. The chickens are land birds. They roost up high as a protection against predators, and so their feet are formed differently, and it's a strain for them to have to hold on to something tiny while they're trying to sleep. So they're better with something that's a bit bigger. All right, now I love the fan idea. I think they'll like that. Trying to use artificial heat, though, is always a little bit of a problem with chickens, because you don't want to put anything like a heat lamp or something like that that could fall and catch fire. There are some systems like radiator panels that won't cause problems, but a lot of times if the chickens with ours winters are not all that cold, as long as they are clean and dry and not in the wind and have good clean air, they can pretty much deal with what our winter deals out. And it is good to have a window for the chickens. They do wake up with light. They are triggered by light. They have a really powerful sleep cycle. It's almost like they're not comatose, but they can barely move at all when they're sleeping. So the light is important for them for waking up. And they also bear that in mind, because they're very vulnerable to predators. They can't escape if they can't see. Using lights for increasing egg production does work. The question is whether or not, what the controversy is, whether or not that causes the chickens to not be able to rebuild and maintain and get their REM sleep. And adding a little bit of time probably doesn't make any difference, particularly since we are giving them the best of food and the best of care and all of that. But I wouldn't add on too much of it, because I wouldn't want to strain them. And yeah, it is. So that is controversial. You're right. And in a lot of commercial operations, though, they don't want to have the chickens not producing in the winter, because they have a market year round, and we're not accustomed to having things seasonal anymore. I think you can save eggs. You can also choose. Some breeds are better at laying during the winter than others, and some of the breeds. So you can choose breeds that will deal with this climate, and breeds that, so I think we need to cover that too, is send out some lists of breeds that work very well. But laying a lot of eggs all at once in their first year of laying and laying really early has a benefit if you are producing them commercially, but it does have its downside if you're going to keep them for their lifespan. And it also means that the ones that bear very young and very frequently are at risk for having a prolapse, which is where their oviduct actually turns itself inside out and it's exposed, and it's very difficult to treat. You can treat it, but it takes a while. It takes some weeks to have them recover. Any other questions? Let's see. Fresh eggs would be shelf stable. The eggs are fresh. You can keep them at room temperature. All over the world, people keep their eggs at room temperature, but in the United States, we prefer that they be refrigerated. And part of it is because of the way that our our chickens are produced. Our commercial egg operations don't vaccinate for salmonella because it's an extra expense for birds that you don't keep for very long, but they can be vaccinated for salmonella if you choose to, like in the EU. The main concern is that the bacteria will be on the outside of the shell. The chicken produces a bloom so that it's difficult for that bacteria to get inside unless you wash them. The washing process takes off the bloom, and if the water isn't hot enough, that allows whatever is on the dirt that's on the outside of the shell can then, after all, it has to be a permeable membrane, otherwise the chicken side wouldn't be able to breathe. So you know that air and other things can go through. So that's the question, is if you just take the egg and use it without refrigeration, you can, but the recommendation for anyone in the United States is to refrigerate eggs. And of course, our eggs, your home eggs would be different because they haven't been machine washed like the ones that you buy in the store. And fresh eggs would be shelf stable longer just because they're not as old. When you get eggs in the store, they've already got some time on them. I mean, look at the difference between some collard greens you get at the farmer's market and some collard greens you get at the supermarket. The ones in the supermarket are going to be older than the ones that were picked just a few days ago or the ones from your own garden. And the same thing holds true with eggs. It takes time to get things circulated, and the eggs that have come from your chickens that day are definitely going to keep longer. But as I said, officially, we always recommend refrigerating. And so have we got anything else? Well, I hope that we can do another class, and let's go back and let me show you some of the information things that we've got on here. Okay. So here are some handy books. Gail Demeraux writes some very good books as far as a lot of information on health. There are so many different things that chickens can get. They can get common things. You can avoid a lot of them by not feeding them on the ground, like in the coop and the run. Don't put their food on the ground, even though that's how you see it in all the movies about being on a farm. But put them into a container so that you don't have that fecal oral transmission of worm eggs and so on. But the books on chicken health has a lot of information on that. Do bear in mind though, with that one, that it's mostly about producing poultry flock, so it's going to have a geared towards more than just having 3 hens in your backyard, but it's still a lot of useful information. And then Harvey Ursary has some very interesting techniques. He actually keeps Icelandic hens, which are very durable, and he's doing a natural approach. So that's a land-raised chicken that he keeps. I think his farm is in Virginia. But that wouldn't necessarily be ideal for a backyard, because the thing that makes them cool, they can get way up into trees, they will wander far, they will stick together, they're really tough, and they don't like to be handled, which is not necessarily great for backyard, but still his information is great. And then the Stories Guide to Raising Chickens is also by Gail Demeraux, and has a lot of information on it, not just on health, but on housing. And then the last one is a kid's guide to keeping chickens. I recommend that one because it has some ideas on how to integrate chickens into your home. All right, and then here's some troubleshooting things that I think I'll just leave that for issues that will come up after you get hens, because you don't have that problem now. And what's our next one? And then egg eating. Then, of course, you don't want to leave eggs in there because you don't want the chickens to discover that eggs are delicious. And then ecto and endo parasites, that's what we're talking about as far as lice and mites or worms. And then rent a coop is a place where you can rent. They have golden comets, which are a cross between a Delaware and a Rhode Island, I think, or a New Hampshire. You can dip your toe in the water without the commitment. They will bring a tractor coop to you, and you can arrange to have chickens for a while, and then try it out and see if this is for you before you get into buying chickens and hens. And then Deer Run Farm is one of the local NPIP farms that does sell hatching eggs and chicks and pullets. And then you look at all these handy dandy lists, and because we're past our time, I guess. And then also here are some more sources that you can get on the PowerPoint. City chicken and backyard chickens. The school system for the school, for the hen program has some information on it, and backyard chickens is one that I can highly recommend. And then Country Living is a magazine that's all of it, that has little hints on how to raise them. So, and then last, we need to have that sheet on the, let's see, there it is. Okay, so this is the application. Send an email. My email address is kd_mclin@me.com. Put annual permit on the subject line, and I will send you this form because the only way I can find it is a PDF. So unfortunately, there's no link for it, but I can send it to you. So send me an email and I will send it to you. And then the laws, and there we are. So we're at an end, and I'm so glad. I really want to thank everyone for participating. Let's unmute everybody. Let's see, how do we do that? Okay, and I hope that you will send in whatever you'd be interested in having for another class for whatever the next stage is. Have a good time exploring, and send me an email if you'd like to try the application. And also, I'd love to